Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if having ADHD makes it harder to learn new things? Well, this new study dives deep into exactly that, looking at how people with and without ADHD learn using statistics. Today, we're talking about something called statistical learning, which is basically our brain's superpower to figure out patterns in what we see and hear. Think about how babies learn to talk. They listen to a whole bunch of sounds and slowly start to pick out which sounds go together to make words. That is statistical learning in action, and researchers are super curious if people with ADHD have a harder time with this special skill. The big question this research tries to answer is whether people with ADHD as a group struggle with this pattern finding skill compared to people who don't have ADHD. But it goes even deeper. They also wanted to know if things like your ability to keep a rhythm or how well your memory works play a role in how good you are at statistical learning. And if these things are different in people with ADHD, could they explain any differences in learning? So how did they test this? Imagine listening to a stream of sounds like a made-up language. The researchers created this artificial language with specific patterns. They then used a cool technology called EEG, which measures brainwaves to see how participants' brains reacted while they were listening. This is like watching the brain learn in real time. After listening, they also gave people tests to see what they remembered from the made-up language. They had two kinds of sound streams. One was structured, where certain sound combinations clearly formed words based on how often they appeared together. The other was a random stream, where there were no clear word patterns. By comparing brain activity to the structured stream versus the random stream, they could see if the brain was picking up on those word patterns. They also gave participants other tests. Some tested their sense of rhythm, some their memory, and one even measured their vocabulary size. They tested musicality, which is a general sense of how musically inclined someone is. They also looked at rhythmic ability using tasks like the computerized adaptive beat alignment task, or CABAT, and the rhythm and accent subtests of PROMs. For memory, they used the forward digit span test, which is a classic way to check short-term memory, especially the part that handles sounds and words. And for vocabulary, they used the Peabody Picture vocabulary test, which measures how many words someone understands. Now, for the big reveal, what did they find? Get this. The researchers found that when they looked at the groups as a whole, there weren't really any big differences in statistical learning, rhythmic ability, working memory, or vocabulary size between the ADHD group and the neurotypical group. This is pretty surprising because often studies focus on group differences. Instead of group differences, the study found that individual differences within each group were much more important. This means that some people with ADHD were great at statistical learning, and some people without ADHD weren't. And the same was true for the other skills they tested. It really suggests that it is not so much about whether you have ADHD, but about you as an individual. When they looked at the brainwave data, which measured how well people's brains were locking onto the word patterns in the structured language, they found that the ADHD group and the neurotypical group showed similar brain activity. This means their brains were learning the patterns similarly. Even when they looked at how the brain activity changed over time during the listening task, they saw that while some individuals showed a clear learning curve, this pattern wasn't tied to whether they had ADHD or not. The individual learning patterns, or how they changed over time, were more important than the diagnosis. The behavioral tests after listening also showed similar results. People with and without ADHD rated the made-up words they heard as equally familiar. This points again to no significant difference in their ability to learn and remember the words based on the patterns. There was a little bit of a hint of a difference in one of the behavioral tasks, the target detection task. This task measured how quickly people could react to a specific sound within the language stream. The results here were a bit unclear, but it hinted that maybe, just maybe, the ADHD group was slightly different in their reaction times. But overall, the evidence strongly suggested that statistical learning itself wasn't impaired. And what about those other skills like rhythm and memory? The study found no significant group differences here either. This is a key point because, as they mentioned, previous research often suggests that people with ADHD might have difficulties with rhythm and working memory. This study, with its specific tests and methods, didn't find that to be the case. When they looked at whether these other skills like rhythmic ability or working memory were related to statistical learning, they found that in their combined group of participants, participants, there wasn't a strong connection between statistical learning and rhythm or working memory. However, there was a small glimmer of evidence suggesting a connection between statistical learning and vocabulary size. This means that in the combined group, people with larger vocabularies tended to be slightly better at statistical learning. This is a really interesting finding that aligns with some previous research. So, what does this all mean? The main takeaway is that for statistical learning, which is so important for things like learning language, having ADHD doesn't seem to automatically mean you are at a disadvantage. The study emphasizes that individual differences are huge, and that focusing on group averages might hide the fact that people within any group are very different. The researchers also noted some limitations. For instance, their ADHD group was mostly female, and this could affect the results because ADHD can look different in males and females. They also didn't control for medication use. They also point out that their sample, even though it included people with ADHD, might not have had enough people with severe impairments in these cognitive skills to really see strong correlations. They suggest that future studies should perhaps look more at specific ADHD symptoms rather than just a diagnosis, and consider gender more carefully. They also believe that using Bayesian statistics, which they did, is really helpful because it allows researchers to interpret results where there is no difference, not just when there is a difference. Overall, this research is super important because it challenges the idea that ADHD automatically means a deficit in learning certain fundamental skills. It highlights that people are complex and unique, and that our brains are amazing at finding patterns regardless of a diagnosis. It really makes you think about how we understand learning and neurodiversity. What do you think about these findings? Does this change how you think about learning and ADHD? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained simply, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching.